Sometimes the people who change the world are the ones nobody believed in. Sometimes the loudest victories come from the quietest souls. And sometimes the person standing at the bottom of the mountain, the one everyone laughs at, the one they bet against, the one they whisper about behind closed doors, is the very same person who plants a flag at the top. This is a true story, not a fairy tale, not a movie script. This is the real, raw, unfiltered story of a young woman who walked into a world built to break her, a world that told her she did not belong, a world that laughed in her face and she did not flinch, she did not quit, she did not look back. And one day, in front of thousands, a 4-star SEAL Admiral called her name, and the same people who had laughed went completely silent. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She grew up in a small town in rural Oklahoma, the kind of town where everybody knew everybody and nobody left. The roads were dusty. The summers were brutal. The winters were worse. Her father was a mechanic who worked 14-hour days fixing trucks and tractors. Her mother worked part-time at the local grocery store and spent the rest of her time raising Sarah and her 2 younger brothers. They were not poor, but they were not comfortable either. Every dollar had a job. Every meal was planned. Every bill was a decision. Sarah was different from the other kids in town, and she knew it from a young age. While the girls in her school talked about dresses and boys and weekend parties, Sarah was running. She ran every morning before school. She ran in the heat. She ran in the rain. She ran when nobody was watching. She did push-ups in her room at night. She climbed the old oak tree behind her house over and over again until her hands were rough and calloused. People in town thought she was strange. Her teachers called her intense. Her classmates called her weird. But Sarah did not care what they called her. She had a dream, and that dream was bigger than their opinions. When Sarah was 11 years old, her grandfather passed away. He had been a Marine. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. He never talked about the war. He never bragged about his medals. But he carried himself with a quiet strength that Sarah admired more than anything in the world. The night before he died, he held Sarah's hand in the hospital and told her something she would never forget. He said, "The world will always try to put you in a box, Sarah. Do not let them. You were born to do something big. I can feel it." Those words burned into her heart like a brand. She carried them every single day after that. By the time Sarah was in high school, she had made up her mind. She was going to join the military. Not just join, she was going to become one of the best. She wanted to attend the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. She wanted to serve her country in a way that would make her grandfather proud. She wanted to prove that a girl from a small town in Oklahoma could stand shoulder to shoulder with the toughest men and women in the world. But the road to Annapolis was not easy. The Naval Academy was one of the most selective institutions in the country. It accepted less than 8% of its applicants. You needed perfect grades, athletic ability, leadership experience, and a nomination from a member of Congress. Sarah had the grades. She had the athletics, but she did not have connections. She did not have money. She did not have anyone in her family who knew how the system worked. She had to figure it all out on her own. She spent months writing letters. She called the office of her local congressman 17 times before someone finally agreed to meet with her. She drove 4 hours with her father to the state capitol in a truck that smelled like engine oil and old leather. She sat in a waiting room for 3 hours in a borrowed blazer that was too big for her. When she finally got her meeting, the congressman's aide looked at her like she was lost. He asked her if she was sure she wanted a military academy and not a regular university. She looked him in the eye and said she had never been more sure of anything in her life. Something in her voice made him sit up straight. He handed her the application. Months passed. Sarah trained harder than ever. She studied for the entrance exams until her eyes burned. She ran her fastest mile times. She did more pull-ups than most of the boys in her school. She wrote her personal essay 17 times before she was satisfied. She poured everything she had into that application. Every drop of sweat, every late night, every ounce of belief she had in herself. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday in April. Sarah was sitting on the porch with her mother when the mailman brought it. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the envelope. When she read the words, "Congratulations, you have been appointed to the United States Naval Academy," she did not scream. She did not cry. She just sat there, holding the letter, staring at it, as if the words might disappear if she blinked. Her mother cried. Her father came home from work that night and did something Sarah had never seen him do before. He cried too. The whole town heard about it within a day. Some people were proud. Some people were surprised. And some people shook their heads and said she would not last. They said the academy would chew her up and spit her out. They said she was too small, too quiet, too much of a dreamer. Sarah heard all of it. She stored it in a place inside her chest, right next to her grandfather's words, and she used it as fuel. She arrived at the Naval Academy on a hot day in late June. Induction Day. I-Day, they called it. The moment she stepped off the bus, her life changed. The chaos was immediate. Upperclassmen were screaming in every direction. New cadets were running, stumbling, getting yelled at for things they did not even understand yet. The air was thick with humidity and tension. Sarah had never experienced anything like it. The noise was overwhelming. The pressure was instant. She could see some of the new cadets already breaking down. One girl was crying near the barracks. One boy looked like he was going to be sick. Sarah felt the fear crawling up her spine, but she pushed it down. She pushed it deep, deep down, and she kept moving. The first thing they did was strip away her identity. They took her clothes, her phone, her jewelry, everything that connected her to her old life. They gave her a uniform. They shaved the sides of her hair. They gave her a number. She was no longer Sarah Mitchell from Oklahoma. She was Midshipman 4th Class Mitchell. She was nobody. She was nothing. That was the point. The academy broke you down before it built you back up. The first week was called Plebe Summer, and it was designed to test every limit a human being had. They woke up before dawn. They ran until their legs screamed. They did exercises until their muscles gave out. They studied military procedures until their heads pounded. They were yelled at constantly. They were given impossible tasks with impossible deadlines. They were pushed to the edge of their physical and mental capacity, and then they were pushed further. Sarah handled it better than most. She was used to hard work. She was used to pushing through pain. But what she was not prepared for was the social dynamic. The academy was still a place where women had to prove themselves twice as hard as the men. Sarah was one of the smallest cadets in her company. She was quiet. She kept her head down and did her work, and that made her a target. It started small, little comments here and there. A guy in her company made a joke about her size during formation. Another one asked her if she had gotten lost and ended up at the wrong school. They called her country girl, like it was an insult. They whispered about her behind her back. They said she did not have what it took. They said she would be gone by Christmas. Sarah heard it all. She felt every word like a small cut, but she did not react. She did not give them the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. The physical challenges were relentless. There was a fitness test in the third week that included a timed obstacle course, a distance run, and a swim qualification. Sarah was a strong runner, but she was not a strong swimmer. She had grown up in Oklahoma, far from any ocean. She had learned to swim in a muddy pond behind her uncle's farm. The pool at the academy was nothing like that pond. It was deep and cold, and the instructors were merciless. She had to tread water for minutes that felt like hours. She had to swim laps in full gear. She swallowed water. She panicked. She sank. An instructor had to pull her to the edge. The laughter was not loud, but she heard it. She heard the snickers from the other cadets who had grown up swimming in pools and oceans. She saw the looks. She felt the judgment. One of the upperclassmen, a tall guy named Ryder, stood over her as she coughed up pool water and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe you should stick to running through cornfields." The other cadets laughed. Sarah wiped her face, stood up, and said nothing. She walked back to the starting position, and she got back in the water. That night, alone in her bunk, she cried. She cried quietly, with her face pressed into her pillow so nobody would hear. She thought about home. She thought about her father's truck and her mother's kitchen and the oak tree in the backyard. She thought about quitting. The thought was warm and tempting, like a blanket on a cold night. She could go home. She could go to a regular college. She could live a normal life. Nobody would blame her. But then she thought about her grandfather. She thought about his hands, rough and steady. She thought about his words. "You were born to do something big." She wiped her eyes. She set her alarm for 4 a.m. She was going to learn to swim if it killed her, and so began a routine that would define the next several months of her life. Every morning, before anyone else was awake, Sarah went to the pool. She taught herself. She watched videos on technique in the library. She asked one of the swimming instructors for extra help. and when he saw how serious she was, he agreed to meet her early 3 mornings a week. She practiced until her arms felt like they were going to fall off. She practiced until the chlorine burned her eyes and her skin was raw. She practiced until the water stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like a friend. The other cadets did not notice at first. They were too busy with their own struggles. Plebe summer was brutal for everyone. People were dropping out every week. The class was shrinking. Beds that were full on Monday were empty by Friday. The pressure was constant, and it filtered out anyone who was not fully committed. Sarah watched people leave, and each time she felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. She was not going to be one of them. She was not going to be a name crossed off a list. Weeks turned into months. Pleb summer ended, and the academic year began. But the challenges only intensified. Now Sarah had to balance a crushing academic load with military duties, physical training, and the constant pressure of being a plebe. Plebes were at the bottom of the chain. They were the ones who had to carry the bags, clean the rooms, memorize entire passages from military handbooks, and recite them on demand. If they failed, they were punished. If they succeeded, they were given harder tasks. Sarah threw herself into everything. She studied relentlessly. She trained relentlessly. She improved her swimming week after week until she was not just passing the qualifications, but excelling at them. She ran faster than most of the men in her company. She could do more pull-ups than half of them. She was climbing the ranks in academics. She was quiet about it. She did not brag. She did not show off. She just kept working. But the social challenges continued. Ryder, the upperclassman who had mocked her at the pool, seemed to have made it his personal mission to break her. He gave her the worst assignments. He singled her out during inspections. He found fault with everything she did. Her uniform was never pressed well enough. Her salute was never sharp enough. Her answers were never fast enough. He stood inches from her face and screamed at her until spit hit her cheeks. He called her names that she would never repeat. He told her she was a waste of a spot that should have gone to someone who actually belonged. Sarah never broke in front of him, not once. She stood at attention, eyes forward, jaw tight, and she took it. Every insult, every humiliation, every attempt to make her crack. She absorbed it all, and she turned it into something hard and unbreakable inside her chest. She did not hate Ryder. She did not waste energy on hate. She simply decided that his voice would not be the voice that defined her. There was one night that almost broke her, though. It was a Tuesday in November, cold and rainy, and Sarah had just failed an engineering exam. She had studied for hours, but the material was beyond anything she had encountered before. She walked back to her room in the rain, soaking wet, holding the exam paper with a failing grade circled in red ink. When she got to her hallway, she saw Ryder leaning against the wall with 2 other upperclassmen. He saw the paper in her hand. He smiled. "Failing already?" he said. "I told you, you do not belong here." The other 2 laughed. Sarah walked past them without a word. She went into her room. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of her bed. She held the exam paper in her hands and stared at it for a long time. She thought about every person who had ever told her she could not do it. She thought about every laugh, every whisper, every shake of the head. The weight of it all pressed down on her like a physical thing, like someone had placed a stone on her chest. She picked up the phone to call her mother. Her mother answered on the second ring. Sarah could not speak for a moment. She just breathed into the phone. Her mother said, "Baby, are you okay?" And Sarah said, "Mom, I do not know if I can do this." There was a long silence. Then her mother said something simple and powerful. She said, "Sarah, you have been doing hard things your whole life. This is just one more, and you have never quit anything. Do not start now." Sarah hung up the phone. She spread the exam paper on her desk. She opened her textbook, and she studied until 3 in the morning. She retook the exam the following week and scored one of the highest grades in the class. That moment became a turning point, not because the struggle got easier, but because Sarah realized something important about herself. She realized that the pain, the doubt, the fear, all of it was temporary. It would pass. But the decision to keep going, the decision to get back up one more time, that was permanent. That was who she was. She was the girl who got back up. Winter turned to spring. Spring turned to summer. Sarah completed her plebe year. She had not just survived. She had distinguished herself. Her physical fitness scores were in the top 10% of her class. Her academic marks had climbed steadily after the engineering setback. Her instructors had taken notice. One of them, a retired Marine colonel named Harris, pulled her aside after a field exercise and said, "Mitchell, I have seen a lot of cadets come through here. Most of them have talent. Some of them have grit. You have both. Do not waste it." Those words meant more to Sarah than any grade or score. Because Colonel Harris was not someone who gave compliments lightly. He was known as one of the toughest instructors at the academy. He had seen combat. He had lost friends in war. He did not have time for flattery. When he told Sarah she had something special, she believed him. But Sarah was not satisfied with just being good. She wanted to be great. She wanted to push herself into territory that very few people, especially very few women, had ever entered. She had been reading about special operations. She had been reading about the Navy SEALs. She had been reading about the most elite warriors in the United States military, and a thought had begun to form in her mind, quiet at first, like a candle flame in a dark room, but growing brighter and steadier with each passing day. She wanted to be part of that world. She wanted to serve alongside the best of the best. She knew it was almost impossible. She knew the odds were stacked against her in ways she could not even fully understand yet. But she also knew something else. She knew that impossible was just a word people used when they were afraid to try, and Sarah Mitchell was not afraid. The summer before her second year at the academy, Sarah went home to Oklahoma for 2 weeks. It was the first time she had been back since leaving for Annapolis. The town looked the same. The roads were still dusty. The summers were still brutal. The old oak tree still stood behind her house, tall and stubborn, just like her. But Sarah was not the same girl who had left. She was harder. She was leaner. She moved differently. She spoke differently. There was a steadiness in her eyes that had not been there before. The kind of steadiness that comes from being tested over and over again and choosing not to break. Her father noticed it the moment she stepped out of the car. He looked at her for a long time without saying anything. Then he pulled her into a hug and held on longer than usual. Her mother made her favorite meal that night, fried chicken and mashed potatoes and cornbread, and the whole family sat around the table and listened to Sarah talk about the academy. She did not tell them about Ryder. She did not tell them about the nights she cried into her pillow. She did not tell them about the engineering exam, or the pool, or the feeling of being invisible in a room full of people who thought she did not belong. She told them about the good parts. She told them about the friends she had made, the things she had learned, the sunrises over the Chesapeake Bay. She wanted them to be proud, not worried. But her father could read her better than anyone. After dinner, while her mother was doing dishes and her brothers were watching television, he sat with her on the porch. The crickets were loud. The sky was full of stars. He looked at her and said, "You are carrying something heavy, Sarah. I can see it." She did not answer right away. She just looked at the sky and let the silence sit between them. Then she said, "Dad, I want to do something that nobody thinks I can do." He waited. She told him about the SEALs. She told him about special operations. She told him that she wanted to push into a world that had been closed to women for most of its history. She told him she knew it was crazy. She told him she knew people would think she had lost her mind. Her father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When you were 6 years old, you told me you were going to climb to the top of that oak tree. I told you it was too tall. You looked at me like I had said something ridiculous and you climbed it anyway. You fell 3 times. You scraped your knees, you cut your hands, and you still climbed it. That is who you are, Sarah. You climb things that other people say are too tall." It was not permission. It was not advice. It was recognition. He saw her, and that was enough. When Sarah returned to the academy for her second year, she was a different kind of focused. She had a target now, a clear, specific, almost terrifying target. She wanted to position herself for assignment to a special warfare unit after graduation. She knew that the path was narrow and steep. She knew that the physical standards were beyond anything she had faced so far. She knew that the mental requirements were even harder than the physical ones. And she knew that as a woman, she would face resistance that went beyond policy and into culture. There were people in the military who did not believe women had any place in combat roles, let alone in special operations. Sarah did not waste time arguing with those people. She let her performance argue for her. She began training at a level that shocked even her closest friends at the academy. She woke up at 4 every morning and ran 5 miles before breakfast. After classes, she went to the weight room and trained for 2 hours. She focused on functional strength, the kind of strength that special operators needed. She carried heavy rucksacks on long marches. She did countless burpees, pull-ups, and flutter kicks. She practiced holding her breath underwater for longer and longer periods. She studied combat tactics. She read every book she could find on special operations history, on leadership under fire, on the psychology of survival. Her roommate, a smart and kind woman named Jessica Torres from San Diego, watched all of this with a mixture of admiration and concern. Jessica was studying to become a naval intelligence officer. She was practical and logical, the kind of person who calculated risks and made decisions based on data. One night while Sarah was doing push-ups on the floor of their room at 11 at night, Jessica sat up in bed and said, "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer." Sarah stopped mid-push-up and looked at her. Jessica said, "Are you trying to prove something, or do you actually want this?" It was a fair question. It was the kind of question that separated dreamers from doers. Sarah sat on the floor, breathing hard, sweat dripping off her forehead, and she thought about it. Then she said, "Both. I want this more than anything I have ever wanted, and I also want to prove that wanting it is enough." Jessica nodded. From that night on, she became Sarah's biggest supporter. She helped her study. She timed her runs. She stayed up late quizzing her on military history and tactics. She was there when Sarah needed to talk, and there when Sarah needed silence. Their friendship became one of the pillars that held Sarah up during the hardest years of her life. Second year at the academy was harder than the first in many ways. The academics were more demanding. The military responsibilities were greater, and the social dynamics shifted in unexpected ways. Sarah's reputation had begun to grow. People knew who she was now. They knew about her fitness scores. They knew about her early morning runs. They knew she was gunning for something big, and that made some people uncomfortable. Ryder had graduated, but his spirit lived on in others. There were upperclassmen, and even some of Sarah's peers, who resented her ambition. They did not say it to her face most of the time, but the whispers were constant. They said she was trying too hard. They said she was showing off. They said she was delusional for thinking she could compete with men in special operations. One cadet, a big guy named Marcus who was on the football team, told her during a group exercise that she should know her limits and focus on something realistic. Sarah looked at him calmly and said, "My limits are not your business." The group went silent. Marcus never spoke to her like that again, but the resistance was not always so direct. There were subtle ways the system pushed back against her. She was passed over for leadership positions that she was clearly qualified for. She was given evaluations that praised her physical ability but questioned her temperament for high-stress environments. One senior officer wrote in her review that she was impressive for a female cadet, as if her gender was an asterisk next to her achievements. Sarah read that review 3 times. Each time the anger burned a little hotter, but she did not let it consume her. She filed it away in that place inside her chest, next to everything else, and she used it. During her 3rd year, Sarah was selected for a summer training program that sent a small group of cadets to work alongside active-duty special operations units. It was an observation and familiarization program, not actual training, but it was a chance to see the world she wanted to enter up close. Only 12 cadets from the entire academy were selected. Sarah was the only woman. The program took place at a naval special warfare base in Virginia. From the moment she arrived, Sarah felt the tension. The active-duty operators looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They were professionals. They were polite, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. She was smaller than every man on the base. She weighed less than most of their rucksacks, and she was entering a world where size and strength were not just advantages but survival tools. The first week was orientation. They watched training exercises. They attended briefings. They sat in classrooms and learned about the history and mission of naval special warfare. It was fascinating, but Sarah was restless. She wanted to do, not watch. On the 4th day, she asked the program coordinator, a lieutenant commander named Walsh, if there was any way she could participate in the physical training alongside the operators. Walsh looked at her like she had asked to fly to the moon. He said, "Mitchell, these men train at a level that would put most cadets in the hospital." Sarah said. I understand that, sir. I am still asking. Walsh thought about it for a day. Then he came back and said she could join the morning physical training sessions, but only if she understood that no accommodations would be made for her. The standards would be the same. The pace would be the same. If she fell behind, she fell behind. Sarah agreed without hesitation. The first morning session nearly destroyed her. They ran 6 miles on soft sand at a pace that made her lungs feel like they were being ripped out of her chest. Then they did an hour of calisthenics that made plebe summer look like a warm-up. Then they carried logs as a team, heavy wooden logs that dug into her shoulders and made her knees buckle. Sarah was the smallest person in the group by at least 50 pounds. She fell behind on the run. She nearly collapsed during the log carry, but she did not quit. She finished everything. When it was over, she stood bent over with her hands on her knees, gasping for air, while the operators barely looked winded. Nobody said anything encouraging. Nobody patted her on the back. That was not how these men operated. They respected action, not words, and the only action that mattered was showing up again the next day. Sarah showed up. She showed up every single morning for the rest of the program. Some days she kept pace. Some days she fell behind. But she always finished. She always completed every exercise, every run, every carry. She never asked for help. She never made excuses. By the end of the second week, something shifted. The operators stopped looking at her with skepticism. They started looking at her with something else. It was not admiration exactly. It was recognition. They recognized her because they saw in her the same thing they saw in each other, a refusal to quit. One of the operators, a senior chief named Gutierrez, stopped her after a particularly brutal morning session and said, "Mitchell, I have been doing this for 18 years. I have seen a lot of tough people. You are tougher than most of them." It was the highest compliment she had ever received. But the program was only the beginning. When Sarah returned to the academy for her final year, she knew the real fight was ahead. She had to graduate with distinction. She had to score at the top of her class in physical fitness. She had to navigate the assignment process and convince the right people that she was ready for a role in or near the special operations community. And she had to do all of this while the ground was shifting beneath her feet, because the military was in the middle of a massive debate about women in combat roles. The policy landscape was changing. Doors that had been closed for decades were beginning to crack open. There were new regulations, new studies, new pilot programs that were testing whether women could serve in roles that had previously been reserved for men. It was controversial. It was political. It was messy. And Sarah was right in the middle of it, not by choice, but by circumstance. She did not want to be a symbol. She did not want to be a test case. She wanted to be a warrior. But the world does not always let you choose how your story is told. Her final year was a marathon. The academic load was crushing. She was taking advanced courses in military strategy, naval engineering, and leadership. She was also serving in a leadership role within her company, responsible for mentoring younger cadets. She took that responsibility seriously. She remembered what it felt like to be a plebe, to be scared and uncertain and alone. She made it her mission to be the kind of leader she had wished she had during her first year. She was tough but fair. She demanded excellence but also showed compassion. She earned the respect of the cadets under her command, not through fear but through example. Her physical training did not slow down. If anything, it intensified. She was preparing for the physical screening tests that would determine whether she was eligible for special warfare-adjacent roles. The tests were brutal. They included a timed 1,500-meter swim, a timed run, push-ups, sit-ups and pull-ups, all at standards that were among the highest in the military. Sarah trained for these tests like her life depended on them, because, in a way, it did. This was her dream. This was everything she had been working towards since she was a little girl running through the Oklahoma dirt. She took the screening test on a cold morning in February. The sky was grey. The wind was sharp. She stood on the pool deck in her swimsuit, shivering, surrounded by men who were bigger, stronger, and more experienced than her. The proctor called them to attention. Sarah took a deep breath. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about her father on the porch. She thought about Colonel Harris telling her she had something special. She thought about Senior Chief Gutierrez telling her she was tougher than most. She thought about every single person who had ever told her she could not do this. Then she dove into the water. She swam the 1,500 meters in a time that placed her in the top 15%. She ran the distance course in a time that placed her in the top 10%. She maxed her push-ups. She maxed her sit-ups. She did more pull-ups than anyone expected. When it was over, the proctor looked at her scores and looked at her and said nothing. He did not need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Word spread through the academy fast. Sarah Mitchell had not just passed the special warfare screening, she had crushed it. People who had doubted her went quiet. People who had ignored her started paying attention. And people who had believed in her from the beginning felt a deep, quiet pride. Jessica Torres was the first to hear the news. She ran into their room and hugged Sarah so hard she nearly knocked her over. "I knew it," she said. "I knew you would do it." But Sarah did not celebrate. Not yet. The screening was just one step. The real decisions were still being made behind closed doors, in offices and conference rooms where senior officers debated assignments and futures. Sarah had done everything she could do. She had given everything she had. Now she had to wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Weeks passed. Sarah went to classes. She trained. She led her cadets. She did everything she was supposed to do, but inside the anxiety was constant. Every time she checked her email, her heart raced. Every time a senior officer looked at her, she wondered if they knew something she did not. The uncertainty was like a low hum in the background of her life, always there, never quiet. Then one day in March, she received a message asking her to report to the commandant's office. She put on her dress uniform. She checked herself in the mirror. She walked across the yard with her head high and her stomach in knots. When she arrived, she was told to sit and wait. She sat in a wooden chair outside the office for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Then the door opened and a voice called her in. The commandant was a rear admiral with silver hair and sharp eyes. He did not smile when she entered. He told her to sit. He looked at a file on his desk, her file, and he said, "Mitchell, do you know why you are here?" She said, "No, sir." He said, "You have been recommended for a direct assignment to a special warfare support unit upon graduation. This is unusual. This is significant. And there are people in this building who are not happy about it." He paused. He looked at her. "But I am not one of those people. You have earned this, Mitchell. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Sarah sat in that chair, and for the first time in 4 years, she did not know what to say. She felt something rise inside her chest, something warm and powerful and overwhelming. She wanted to cry, but she did not. She wanted to shout, but she did not. She sat at attention, looked the Admiral in the eye, and said, "Thank you, sir. I will not let you down." When she walked out of that office, the sun was shining on the yard. Cadets were marching in formation. The flag was snapping in the wind. Sarah stood there for a moment and let it all sink in. She was going to do it. She was actually going to do it. The dream that had started in a dusty Oklahoma town, the dream that had survived laughter and doubt and pain and loneliness, was becoming real. But the biggest moment was still coming. Graduation was 2 months away. And what happened on that stage, in front of thousands of people, would change not just Sarah's life, but the way people thought about what was possible. She did not know it yet, but the whole world was about to hear her name, and the people who had laughed were about to go very, very silent. The weeks before graduation moved in a strange rhythm, fast and slow at the same time. Sarah felt every minute of every day with an intensity she had never experienced before. The academy was alive with a buzzing energy that touched everyone, from the youngest plebes to the oldest professors. 4 years of sweat and sacrifice were about to reach their conclusion. For Sarah, it was more than a conclusion, it was a beginning. Everything she had endured, every early morning, every cruel word, every moment of doubt, had been leading to this point, and she could feel the weight of it pressing against her ribs every time she took a breath. She tried to keep her routine normal. She woke up at 4. She ran. She trained. She went to class. She led her cadets through their final exercises, but nothing felt normal. Everything felt charged with meaning. The hallways she had walked 1,000 times now looked different. The mess hall where she had eaten 1,000 meals now felt sacred. The parade ground where she had marched in rain and sun and snow now looked like the most beautiful place on earth. She was leaving. She was actually leaving this place that had torn her apart and put her back together, and she was leaving as someone she barely recognized when she looked in the mirror. Her mother and father drove from Oklahoma for the graduation ceremony. They left 2 days early because her father did not trust the old truck to make the trip without at least one breakdown. He was right. The transmission gave out somewhere in West Virginia, and they spent 6 hours in a repair shop, eating vending machine crackers and waiting for a part. Her mother called Sarah from the shop and said, "We will be there even if I have to push this truck the rest of the way." Sarah laughed for the first time in weeks. They arrived the day before the ceremony, tired and dusty and proud. Sarah met them at the visitors center. Her mother was wearing a new dress she had bought for the occasion, blue with small white flowers. Her father was wearing a suit jacket that did not quite fit his broad mechanic's shoulders. He kept pulling at the sleeves. When Sarah walked toward them in her crisp white uniform, her mother stopped breathing for a second. She put her hand over her mouth and her eyes filled with tears. Her father just stood there, looking at his daughter, and something moved behind his eyes that was too deep for words. They spent the evening walking around the academy grounds. Sarah showed them everything. She showed them the library where she had studied until her eyes burned. She showed them the pool where she had nearly drowned during plebe summer. She told them about that day, about Ryder laughing at her, about the nights she spent alone in the water, teaching herself to swim. Her mother held her hand tight. Her father said nothing, but his jaw clenched the way it always did when he was trying not to show emotion. She showed them the barracks, the classrooms, the chapel with its tall stained glass windows. She showed them the bench where she used to sit after long days and watch the ships move on the Chesapeake. That night, the three of them ate dinner at a small restaurant near the academy. It was nothing fancy, a little place with wooden tables and paper napkins. Sarah ordered a cheeseburger. Her father ordered the same. Her mother ordered a salad, and then ate most of Sarah's fries. They talked about everything and nothing. They talked about the town back home. They talked about Sarah's brothers, one of whom was now in high school and the other in middle school. They talked about the neighbors, the weather, the new diner that had opened on Main Street. They did not talk about the next day. They did not talk about the ceremony. They did not need to. The meaning of tomorrow was sitting at that table with them, invisible and enormous. When they said goodnight, her father pulled her aside. He reached into the pocket of his ill-fitting suit jacket and took out something small and heavy. It was a medal. It was her grandfather's Purple Heart, the one he had received for wounds sustained in Vietnam. Sarah stared at it. She had seen it before, in a frame on her grandfather's wall, but she had never held it. It was small and shaped like a heart, purple with a gold border, and it was heavier than she expected. Her father said he would have wanted you to have it tomorrow. Carry it with you. Sarah closed her fingers around it and pressed it against her chest. She could not speak. She just nodded, and her father kissed her on the forehead and walked away. Graduation morning was clear and bright. The sky was a perfect blue, the kind of blue that looks almost fake. The sun was warm but not hot. A gentle breeze came off the water. It was the kind of day that felt like the universe was paying attention. The academy grounds were already swarming with families, friends, and dignitaries. Flags hung from every building. The parade ground was set up with thousands of white chairs arranged in perfect rows. A massive stage had been erected at the front, draped in red, white, and blue. Speakers had been positioned around the field so that every word would be heard by every person. Sarah put on her dress whites for the last time as a midshipman. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She was lean and strong. Her posture was perfect. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were steady. She was not the scared girl who had arrived on that bus 4 years ago. She was not the girl who had coughed up pool water while people laughed. She was not the girl who had cried into a pillow and thought about going home. She was Midshipman First Class Sarah Mitchell, and she had earned every single stitch of that uniform. She reached into her pocket and felt the cool weight of her grandfather's Purple Heart. She closed her eyes for a moment. She whispered, "I made it, Grandpa." Then she opened her eyes and walked out the door. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock. The graduating class marched onto the field in perfect formation. Hundreds of young men and women in crisp white uniforms moving as one body. The sight was breathtaking. Sarah was somewhere in the middle of the formation, her steps precise, her chin up, her heart hammering. She could hear the crowd, thousands of people in the stands, cheering and clapping and waving flags. She could feel the sun on her face. She could smell the freshly cut grass. Everything was vivid, almost painfully vivid, like her senses had been turned up to their maximum. They took their seats. The speeches began. The Secretary of the Navy spoke about duty and sacrifice. The Academy Superintendent spoke about the legacy of those who had come before. A retired general spoke about the changing nature of warfare and the need for leaders who could adapt and overcome. Sarah listened to every word, but part of her mind was somewhere else. Part of her mind was back in Oklahoma, sitting on the porch with her father, telling him about her impossible dream. Part of her mind was in that pool, sinking, gasping, refusing to drown. Part of her mind was in the commandant's office, hearing the words, "You have earned this." The guest of honor was introduced. The announcer's voice boomed across the field, and the crowd erupted. The man who walked to the podium was Admiral James Crawford, a four-star admiral and one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in American history. He had served for over 30 years. He had commanded operations that were still classified. He had been wounded in combat 3 times. He was a legend, not just in the Navy, but in the entire military. And he was standing on that stage, looking out at a field full of newly minted officers, and his presence alone was enough to make the air feel heavier. Admiral Crawford spoke for about 20 minutes. He did not give a typical graduation speech. He did not talk about success or ambition or climbing ladders. He talked about failure. He talked about the missions that went wrong. He talked about the men he had lost. He talked about the nights he had spent alone in dark rooms in foreign countries, wondering if he was going to make it home. He talked about the times he wanted to quit and the reasons he did not. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had seen the worst the world had to offer and had chosen to keep going anyway. Then he paused. He looked out at the graduating class and said, "Every year I come to events like this, and I see hundreds of young officers who are smart and strong and well-trained. But every once in a while I see someone who is different, someone who has something that cannot be taught, something that cannot be trained, something that comes from a place so deep inside that even the person who has it does not fully understand it. I want to talk about one of those people today." The field went quiet. Sarah felt a strange electricity move through her body. She did not know why. She could not explain it. But something in the Admiral's voice, something in the way the air shifted, told her that this moment was different from all the moments that had come before. Admiral Crawford reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. He looked at it. Then he looked up at the crowd and said, "I have been asked to present a special commendation today. This commendation is for a graduating midshipman who has demonstrated extraordinary physical courage, academic excellence, and leadership in the face of conditions that would have broken most people. This individual arrived at this academy with no connections, no advantages, and no safety net. This individual was doubted, dismissed, and underestimated at every turn. And this individual responded to every obstacle not with anger or resentment, but with an unwavering commitment to excellence that has inspired everyone who has had the privilege of serving alongside them." Sarah's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She gripped the edges of her chair. She looked straight ahead. She could feel Jessica Torres sitting 2 rows behind her, and she just knew that Jessica was holding her breath. The Admiral continued. "This commendation is also accompanied by a direct assignment to the Naval Special Warfare Development Group's Support Division, making this individual one of the first to serve in this capacity under the new integration guidelines. This assignment was not given as a token. It was not given as an experiment. It was given because this individual earned it in a way that left no room for debate. The crowd was absolutely still. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody rustled a program. The silence was so complete that Sarah could hear the flag snapping in the breeze behind the stage. Admiral Crawford folded the paper. He looked out at the field of white uniforms, and then he said the words that changed everything. "Midshipman First Class Sarah Mitchell, please come forward." For a moment the world stopped. Sarah heard her name, but her body did not move. It was as if the sound had to travel through layers and layers of disbelief before it reached her muscles. Jessica Torres made a sound behind her, a gasp or a cry or both. The cadets around Sarah turned to look at her. She could see their faces, some surprised, some moved, some unreadable. She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but her steps were steady. She walked down the row of chairs, past faces she had known for 4 years, past people who had doubted her and people who had believed in her, and she walked toward the stage. The crowd began to clap. It started slowly, scattered and uncertain, like rain before a storm. Then it built. It grew louder. It spread through the stands like a wave. By the time Sarah reached the stairs of the stage, the entire field was on its feet. Thousands of people, officers and families and dignitaries and cadets, were standing and clapping for a girl from a small town in Oklahoma who had refused to quit. Sarah climbed the stairs. She walked across the stage. Admiral Crawford was standing at the podium, and up close he was even more imposing than she had imagined. His chest was covered in ribbons. His eyes were sharp and clear, but when he looked at Sarah, something softened in his face. It was not pity. It was not surprise. It was respect. Pure, unfiltered respect from a man who had spent his life earning it and who knew exactly what it looked like. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and warm. He leaned slightly toward her and said something that the microphone did not pick up, something that was just for her. He said, "Your grandfather would be proud." Sarah's eyes went wide. She did not know how he knew about her grandfather. She did not know if someone had told him, or if he had read her file, or if it was simply the kind of thing that a man like Admiral Crawford could feel. But the words hit her like a lightning bolt. She felt the Purple Heart in her pocket pressing against her leg, and she felt her grandfather's presence as clearly as if he were standing right beside her. The Admiral turned to the crowd and pinned a commendation medal on Sarah's uniform. The crowd roared. The applause was deafening. Sarah stood at attention on that stage, looking out at a sea of faces, and she saw her mother in the stands. Her mother was crying openly, both hands pressed against her face, her shoulders shaking. She saw her father standing next to her mother, and he was doing something she had only seen him do once before. He was crying. Tears were running down his weathered, sun-beaten face, and he was not trying to hide them. He was just standing there, looking at his daughter on that stage, and letting the tears fall. Sarah felt her own eyes burning. She blinked hard. She took a deep breath. She thought about the oak tree in the backyard. She thought about the dusty roads and the 14-hour workdays, and the meals that were always planned down to the penny. She thought about the girl who ran every morning before school while the other kids slept. She thought about the girl who climbed a tree 3 times after falling. She thought about the girl who got back in the water when everyone laughed. The ceremony continued after that, but for Sarah, time had folded in on itself. The rest of the day moved like a dream. She received her diploma. She threw her hat in the air with her classmates. She hugged Jessica Torres so tight they both could not breathe. She found her parents in the crowd, and the 3 of them stood together in a circle, holding each other, not speaking, just feeling the enormity of what had happened. Later that afternoon, as the crowds thinned and the campus grew quiet, Sarah walked back to the bench where she used to sit and watch the ships on the Chesapeake. The water was golden in the late afternoon light. The breeze was gentle. She sat down and took her grandfather's Purple Heart out of her pocket. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. She thought about all the distance between the girl who received a letter on a porch in Oklahoma and the woman sitting on this bench in Annapolis. The distance was not measured in miles. It was measured in moments of decision. Every time she chose to stay instead of leave. Every time she chose to stand instead of fall. Every time she chose to believe in herself when nobody else did. She thought about Ryder and his cruel words. She thought about Marcus telling her to know her limits. She thought about the officer who called her impressive for a female cadet. She thought about every whisper, every laugh, every shake of the head, and she realized something that surprised her. She was not angry. She was not bitter. She was grateful. Not grateful for the cruelty, but grateful for what it had forged inside her. Those people had not broken her. They had built her. They had been the fire, and she had been the steel, and the heat had made her harder and stronger and sharper than she ever could have become without it. She also thought about the people who had lifted her up. Her grandfather, with his quiet words and steady hands. Her father, with his recognition and his tears. Her mother, with her voice on the phone saying, "Do not start now." Colonel Harris, who saw something special in her. Senior Chief Gutierrez, who called her tougher than most. Jessica Torres, who believed in her even on the darkest nights. And Admiral Crawford, who stood on that stage and told the world that Sarah Mitchell had earned her place. The sun dipped lower. The water turned orange, then pink, then purple. Sarah put the Purple Heart back in her pocket and stood up. She took one last look at the Chesapeake. She breathed in the salt air. She let the moments settle into her bones. Then she turned and walked away from the bench, toward the parking lot where her parents were waiting, toward the truck that smelled like engine oil and old leather, toward the future she had earned with blood and sweat and stubborn, relentless belief. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah's story spread in ways she never expected. An article was written about her in a military publication. It was shared online thousands of times. She received letters from young women all over the country, girls who wanted to join the military but were scared, girls who had been told they were not strong enough or brave enough or good enough. Sarah read every single letter, and she wrote back to as many as she could, always with the same message. She told them that fear was not a reason to stop. She told them that doubt was not a sign of weakness. She told them that the people who laugh at your dreams are not the people who get to decide your future. She told them to get back in the water. Sarah reported to her unit in Virginia Beach on a Monday morning in August. She was nervous, but she was ready. She walked through the gates of the base with her bag over her shoulder and her grandfather's Purple Heart in her pocket. She was not naive. She knew there would be more challenges ahead. She knew there would be more people who doubted her. She knew the road would be long and hard and full of moments that would test everything she had. But she also knew something that she had learned over 4 years at the Naval Academy. Something that no amount of doubt or difficulty could take away from her. She knew who she was. She was Sarah Mitchell. She was a warrior. She was a leader. She was the girl who climbed trees that were too tall and swam in waters that were too deep and ran toward things that everyone else ran away from. She was the girl who got laughed at and got back up. She was the girl whose name was called by a 4-star SEAL Admiral in front of thousands of people, and the sound of her name was louder than any laughter had ever been. And she was just getting started.